I'm Peter Earnest. I'm director of the Spy Museum, and I just want to introduce Craig FLOYD, who is the chairman and chief executive officer of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, and he has been an active advocate for the law enforcement officers, both the memorial and the fund, for well over 25 years. And I have known him during the past number of years in which he's been working so hard on the museum. And it's to your great credit, Floyd, and I know you have some news for the folks about the museum itself. The memorial itself was built and dedicated in October of 1991. And they then got congressional approval for a law to authorize the museum itself. And the ground was broken in October 14th, 2010. And of course, one of our first thoughts was, oh, another competitor. And you will be, but you will also be a friend. So there will be programs we will partner on, and I look to the future, and that we will enjoy it together and being friendly competitors. Okay? Please help me welcome Craig FLOYD.
I want to thank Peter and the International Spy Museum. If our museum can be half as successful as they have been here at the Spy Museum, we'll consider that just a fabulous victory. So we're so proud to partner with them once again this evening. This is our 9th in a series of a program that we call Witness to History, a way for the actual participants in major milestone moments in law enforcement history to tell their stories and to share their experiences. This amazing profession called law enforcement. They've had so many amazing moments. We've just captured 8 of them already. Tonight will be our 9th, and we're going to continue to do this for years and years to come, especially once that museum opens. That'll be a great venue for such programs. Part of our programming at the National Law Enforcement Museum is the Witness to History program. Now, we don't have a building yet, all right? I think most of you are probably familiar with that. We do have some 17,000 artifacts that we've already collected and have a fabulous collection of law enforcement's history through those artifacts. We have completed all of the design work for our National Law Enforcement Museum, have all those approvals in place, and we actually have a building permit in hand. So we've just about finished, every box is just about checked off. We are now in the process over the next 60 days. If we keep our fingers crossed, we're going to close on a construction loan to complement the $54 million we've been able to raise to build that museum. And if all goes according to plan, we expect to dedicate and open that museum in 2016. So we'll look forward to that moment, but in the meantime, we have some wonderful programs like tonight to share with you. Some thank yous that are in order here tonight. Certainly, Peter Earnest, the Executive Director of the International Spy Museum and our host for this evening. This is the second time we've been able to partner with them. The last time was our most recent Witness to History event, the Robert Hansen FBI spy case. Just a fascinating discussion about what went on in that infamous case. And so tonight we're here to do it again. I also want to thank our sponsors. This series of Witness to History events has been sponsored for the last couple of years by our great corporate partner, Target. And we have a couple of their representatives here tonight, Mahogany Eller and Jenny Led. And we thank you both for being here, and we certainly thank you. I also want to thank all of you. This is, again, one of our larger crowds. Every time we seem to have an event here, we have a great turnout. And it's a combination of stakeholders, I think, in the Memorial Fund and our museum, as well as many of the stakeholders and constituency of the International Spy Museum. So we're going to do many more of these partnership opportunities together. Tonight's program, just very generally, I wanted to talk about the subject matter. Yesterday in the New York Times, coincidentally, there was a headlined article, "Hackers Lurking in Vents and Soda Machines." All right? got your mind going a little bit. Talked about all the ways that cyber criminals can launch their attacks. And it concluded by saying this: when you know you're the target and you don't know when, where, or how an attack will take place, it's wartime all the time. And most organizations aren't prepared for wartime. Cybercrime is a booming business for organized crime groups all over the world. It could take the form of identity theft, child pornography, financial theft, or even espionage. Cybercrime in the United States is estimated to cost $100 billion annually. And many have called cybercrime the next greatest threat to our national security. So this is serious business, and tonight's discussion is on a very topical subject. Tonight, 3 top experts in the field will help us to better understand what cybercrime really is and how law enforcement is working to combat it. So let me introduce now our participants for the evening. First, our panelists. At the far end of the table here to my left is the legendary FBI Supervisory Special Agent J. Keith Mularski, currently assigned to the Cybercrime Division of the FBI. Back in 2006 to 2008, the FBI launched one of the first undercover operations to combat cybercrime, and Agent Mularski was in charge of that investigation. He lured thousands of cyber criminals to a website called DarkMarket, and his handle was Master Splyntr. And he went deep undercover and managed to fool these cyber criminals for quite some time, and ultimately his groundbreaking efforts were responsible for saving millions of dollars in financial losses and resulted in 60 arrests worldwide. Our second panelist this evening, to my left, is Kevin POULSEN. Kevin is an award-winning investigative journalist and editor of Wired magazine. In 2006, his investigation into the presence of registered sex offenders on MySpace actually spawned federal legislation to address the problem. He's author of the book Kingpin: How One Hacker Took Over the Billion-Dollar Cybercrime Underground. He's also a former computer hacker himself, so he knows from whence he speaks here. Our moderator for this evening, and I'm very thankful he's taking a role that I've assumed at many of these events before. Tonight I get to sit down and listen and enjoy this fascinating discussion. This is my good friend and longtime supporter of the Memorial Fund, a man named SHAWN Henry. He's the former assistant director of the FBI, and he was in charge of cybercrime at the FBI, so he's certainly an expert on this subject. He's now currently the president of the Services Division, and he's the chief security officer for the probably the leader in the industry when it comes to combating cybercrime and allowing businesses to protect themselves from cyber attacks. It's a company called CrowdStrike. And they're a global provider, again, of security technology and services aimed at combating cyber attacks. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to bring SHAWN Henry up here and on with the discussion. Thank you.
I was a little concerned when Peter came up to me and said, we have a speaker problem. And I said, I haven't even started talking. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here for this incredibly important topic. And I, too, want to thank Peter and the Spy Museum and certainly Target for all their generous support. And Craig Floyd, who is a friend to me and somebody who's done so much for the law enforcement community over so many years, somebody that I consider a patriot, helping families who have suffered greatly and tragically, including some of my friends who died in the line of duty, the things that you've done to help those families and to really help bring their lives together and give them a sense of faith and a sense of hope. I can't say enough about what you've done for this community. I just want to thank you for all that. All right, so an incredibly important topic, something that you've heard about an awful lot in the media. And I think that, unfortunately, when you get to hear those stories, you really get to scratch the surface and see and hear what I think is the tip of the iceberg. And people don't often get to understand the total breadth and scope of the threats that we face in the cyber environment. And with both Keith and Kevin, two real experts in this area, both of whom have really kind of a deep understanding and have been hands-on in this space, you're going to get a very, very unique perspective about this emerging threat and about where things are headed, where we see them going, some of the things you may be able to do, some of the things you need to be aware of. So it's going to be a really, really interesting evening. I'm interested to see what the hell you got to say. All right. So let me talk just very, very quickly. I want to give you kind of a quick overview of these threats generally before I turn it over to Keith and Kevin. I'll ask some questions, and we're going to take your questions as well. So you're going to have a great opportunity to participate here. The threats are real and they're growing. Craig talked a little bit about some of the issues that we've seen, but specifically as it relates to organized crime groups. There are teams of people who are working online who are actively seeking out personally identifiable information in this space because it's all about making money. There are many different types of adversaries who are on the network. We'll focus on the organized crime piece. There are certainly others, nation states and hacktivist groups, but I think it's important for the purpose here to focus on these organized crime groups. Everything that we do is online, it's digital, it's being transmitted or stored digitally. All of your personal information, your identity information, somebody's got it, they're holding on to it. And that information is worth billions of dollars. And the adversaries know that that's where the money is. When I started working in the FBI in 1989, I worked some bank robberies. When a bank was robbed, the pool of suspects was limited to the number of people that were in the vicinity of the bank at the time it was robbed. Okay? Because they physically had to be there to get the money. But today, these groups can be operating from anywhere in the world. So somebody sitting in their pajamas 6,000 miles away with a $500 laptop and an internet connection is a potential thief. And they've got the opportunity to attack these networks because they're networks. They're all connected. All of the computers are connected. They're talking on the same infrastructure. That infrastructure is inherently insecure. And once those adversaries gain access to these organizations, they've got the ability to move laterally throughout the organization and to really infiltrate them at the deepest level and access all sorts of information. These organized crime groups oftentimes are very, very similar to the physical organized crime groups that we've seen for many years. If you could imagine a group of jewel thieves targeting jewelry stores in a major city, you've got somebody who's responsible for doing the reconnaissance and finding out which jewelry stores have the high-end merchandise. And you've got somebody who's responsible for disconnecting the alarm. You've got somebody who can, once you're inside, can bypass the combination on the safe and crack the safe. And then when you take all the goods and you get in the getaway car and drive away, you've got somebody who's responsible for taking those jewels and selling them and turning them into cash so they can disperse it among the rest of the gang. The same thing is happening in cybercrime today, except these groups are meeting virtually in underground rooms, in underground servers that are password controlled. They're like dark alleys in your major cities, but they're virtual. And in these groups, you may have these people who've never met each other in the physical space. It's all done virtually, online. And by the way, the 6 or 8 people that are part of the group, they might reside in 6 or 8 different countries. So from a law enforcement perspective, incredibly difficult to understand and identify, do the attribution, not only attributing who the actors are, but how do you actually physically get to them and put your hands on them so you can take them off the playing field. So it's an incredibly sophisticated area. It's continuing to grow, and we're gonna talk about that now. From the FBI's perspective, I think the FBI and other law enforcement agencies, Secret Service and state and local law enforcement agencies, through many investigations, have had a big impact on physical organized crime. And because of that, there's a lot of migration into this space. So Keith Mularski Craig did a great job, I think, describing Keith. Just a phenomenal FBI agent I had the pleasure of working with when I was in FBI headquarters, and really implemented one of the first really deep undercover operations. Now, we had started to work undercover operations in the early 2000s in the cyber environment. It was very complex. Working an undercover operation in the physical world is incredibly complex for a whole host of reasons. There's risk from a law enforcement perspective, there's liability, there are issues you're going to have to deal with attorneys when you bring a case to trial. Adding the virtual environment on top of the already complex undercover operation is just a whole host of challenges. And when Keith started this case, there was an awful lot that he had to navigate. A lot of really challenging issues, which we'll talk about. So what I'd like to do is ask Keith to give us kind of a quick overview of this very specific case. And then we're going to kind of go back and forth with Kevin and myself and Keith and really tease out some of the key issues here. But to be able to hear from the agent who was deep undercover in this virtual organized crime group, I think you're going to get a very unique perspective on how we address these types of cases. Keith.
Thanks. First, I want to say thanks for having me. It's really an honor to be here and to tell this story. I think it's a fascinating story that a lot of people were involved in. So hopefully you come away with that at the end of this. I guess the whole operation was never really intended to be what it turned out to be. We started, as Sean was saying, that there's these organized crime groups. There's these forums that are online that are out there, and the unique thing about them is because they don't meet physically, they have to advertise what they do. So you go onto these closed forums, and the bad guys will say the services that they advertise. So, this guy sells compromised credit cards, this guy sells exploits, and they advertise out there. So when I first came to cyber, I met with a postal inspector named Greg Crabb, who had been investigating this, and he showed me a lot of the work that he had did and showed how it was organized crime, and I said, wow, this is really neat. So what we did was, at the beginning, was we just wanted to try to gather intelligence on the people that were selling things, and hopefully that would take us back to the crimes, because the Bureau traditionally has always been a very reactive agency, where we have a victim, and then they report it, and we try to find out who did it. Well, the thing about this is, in these forums, the bad guys are saying, hey, I'm doing this type of crime, so let's just try to get profiles on them and get it out and help other FBI cases. So what we kind of needed to do was you needed to get online. You have to pick a handle. So I am a big Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle fan.
Did that help you get the FBI?
Absolutely. So I was watching, you end up being a fan when you have a little kid. So Saturday morning I'm watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with my son, and I see this underground rat named Master Splyntr, and I said, wow, you can kind of spell it hackerish, and I was like, it's kind of cool. So I decided, well, Master Splyntr will be my name. It was kind of an underground rat, and so I thought that was kind of neat, that the irony of it. So we worked initially with a company called Spam House to kind of backstop. So because I didn't have authority to do illegal activity or anything like that, and I just wanted to do passive collection. I needed to make sure I didn't get booted off of these sites. So Spam House they track the world's worst spammers, and so we thought, well, being a spammer can kind of get us in a lot of different things. People that are doing spamming, people that are doing malicious code, exploits, and that by having a persona of a spammer, we can kind of get into a lot of different areas. So they keep a list of the world's top 100 spammers. So we made just a fake profile for me out there, and if you haven't been able to tell, I'm of Polish ancestry. So I wanted to kind of have something that I really knew. So I picked a Polish spammer, and I had a friend of mine that actually was from Poland, and his father was a member of Solidarity and got booted out and came over, and I thought that was a really cool story, and I would remember that, so I kind of adopted that as my legend too. So went out there and I had this profile and I just started, gathering some intelligence. And then after a year, kind of people knew, they would Google Master Splyntr and see I was a spammer. And then in the summer of 2006, some things happened that with some board wars that we probably will talk about with Max Butler, and the opportunity presented itself to kind of take over the forum. So during this commotion, I kind of leveraged that to try to get in, and we applied for our most sensitive undercover technique, which is called a Group 1 undercover. So which we'll talk about the legal processes of that maybe later. But we applied for that and got that, and then one night, while DarkMarket was getting attacked, I was telling the administrator, hey, I could take over your site, I could secure the servers, and he said, okay, let's do it. So I called my other partner, Tom Grasso, who was my technical wizard in this whole thing, and said, do we have an opportunity? Let's do it. So we had the approvals now legally. We took it over, and then for the next 2 years, we were able to monitor all the communications that are on it, and also the other main person that I'm going to dime out to is Eric Strong, who's sitting in there. He was actually the case agent of that, and he made sure I was administratively clean and handled all the grunt work and all of that. So over the next 2 years, we worked a lot with a lot of international law enforcement. We had a lot of potential compromises, which we may get into later. And eventually my name got compromised, but not before we were able to have a successful operation and have a little over 60 arrests worldwide. So it was very rewarding, especially the teamwork that we worked with the industry, and really international cooperation was paramount to this, and I think we had a nice success. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Let me ask Kevin, when I started back in the late 90s in the Bureau and the cyber side, a lot of what we were seeing was frivolity by a lot of people. Hackers that were involved in web defacements and even denial of service attacks that were being conducted by teenagers. But there's this kind of switch here where we move from fun to profit. Can you describe that, talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, so I don't project as well as
I'm a little loud.
I wasn't going to put it that way. When I was growing up in the 1980s, not to date myself, hacking was almost entirely non-profit, and it was purely recreational and exploratory. So this was pre-internet, at least as we understand the internet today, computers were sparsely networked, and there was a kind of romanticism about being able to get into one computer and then go out and explore others. So I was, as a teenager, I was one of a group of probably a few hundred people around the country that were inside of the ARPANET, the forerunner of today's internet, and just hopping around and experimenting and learning about the technology and getting our hands for the first time on computers far more powerful than what you could buy at the local Radio Shack, and enjoying that. And then there was a lot of telephone company system hacking. The phone company at the time was kind of the network of networks, and very complicated, and it would draw you in. One of the reasons why there was no financially motivated criminal hacking at this point is because there was no clear path to it. There was no money out there to be had. That started to change around the late 1990s. You can actually put your finger on the very first time, like the watershed moment where this changed in a big way. There was a computer repairman in Daly City, outside of San Francisco, who had been a recreational hacker, but he found himself getting into a retailer's system and being able to access 80,000 credit card numbers, which was a big number at the time. Huge by today's standards. It's nothing, but the biggest credit card heists up until then had largely been some guy going into a dumpster and getting a dozen credit card numbers off of the carbon paper on the little slider things that they use to bring up credit card transactions. So this was big. He wanted to make some money off of it. It seems like a logical, easy thing to do. You have 80,000 credit card numbers. It's got to be worth something to someone. But there was actually no clear path for him to do anything to it with it. He wound up going into a chat room frequented by other hackers and just offering the whole thing for sale to whoever was willing to pay him for it. That shouldn't have worked. He actually lucked out and found a potential buyer who had mob contacts and who offered him $250,000 for the credit card numbers. Then they had a falling out, and the potential buyer turned him into the FBI, and the guy was arrested at San Francisco International Airport, where he was supposed to do the handoff, and he did the handoff of a CD-ROM containing the credit card numbers, and the feds came in and locked him up. So that pointed out both the opportunity to criminals and one of the big things holding them back at the same time. Suddenly, credit card numbers are being put online. They're living and they're circulating and they're being processed in a purely electronic form on a massive scale, which until then had not been the case, which meant that they were within reach of hackers. The thing holding them back is there was no eBay for hackers, no way to monetize it easily. You can imagine if you have something for sale, if you want to sell your old record collection, go into a chat room and try and sell it there, you're not going to have much luck. You need something like an eBay, something structured where people have reputations and a whole system to support it, a way to transfer money for buying and selling. That finally surfaced for criminals in about 2001 when a bunch of Ukrainian crooks got together and they created the forerunner of DarkMarket, a site called Carter Planet. And that brought in all the pieces together. You could buy and sell credit card numbers, the blank credit cards to imprint them on, and the equipment to do it all, and the magstripe writers to program the magstripes on the back. It became like a universal global market with thousands of people on it. And that's when the shift happened. And everything that we're seeing now, right up to the Target hack. No offense to the sponsors.
I was wondering how long it would take for that to happen.
You knew it would be me. All of that can be traced to that innovation, saying, hey, we're going to set up an infrastructure, a financial infrastructure, and a computer infrastructure to support a marketplace for all the stuff that we're stealing. Since then, it's just been mayhem.
Thanks. That's a great description of that. And I like that timeline to be able to actually put your finger on it. Keith, let me ask you. So I think Kevin's done a great job kind of laying that out. You talked a bit about what you were facing, what you saw. Talk about some of the challenges. So you said, an undercover operation, a group 1 undercover operation, is a very sensitive technique. When you're portraying somebody using a fraudulent identity, it's very sensitive. You may be intercepting their communications. From a law enforcement perspective, a privacy perspective, it really is very, very sensitive. What are some of the hurdles that you faced as you're starting to develop this? Some of the guidance that you're getting and some of the concerns when you create your legend and your actual proposal that you've got to address?
One of the first things from a legal standpoint was, okay, we take over the site. Legally, how are we going to capture these communications? We know that all these are going to be there. Do we need a Title III wiretap? Do we need a search warrant? But if the site is overseas, how do we do that? So we had some very unique legal people that looked at everything. And one of the first things that we did was when we took over the site, the bad guys were they didn't like to be attacked. So they had this banner page with this list that would say, "Hey, DarkMarket is a research site. So there's no illegal activity on there," and there was this long manifest there, and you had to click accept to go into the site. So what we did was we said, well, now that we have this, we can go in and we can modify that, and so then they click accept. So we went in when I took over the site. There's this big long thing, so we just stuck it right in the middle there that says, because I was made an administrator now, And we just said, by your use of the forum, you agree to let any administrator monitor any communications on this site and do whatever they want with them. So we added that in there. So then now anybody that logged on after that, they would have to click accept, and now legally we were allowed to monitor that. But then that didn't cover anything that happened prior to. You would think, okay, well, that covers that, but now we had to, what did we do with all the communications that were there before? So we said, okay, well, technically we would do a search warrant, and normally you have a server and you issue a search warrant on that ISP and you get the data, but we already had the data. So we issued a search warrant on ourselves. We actually went to the judge and said, hey, we have this data, we would like to view it. And the judge said, sounds reasonable, and so now so now we were able to look at all the historic stuff, and then we were able to capture the communications as well. So that was one of the big legal hurdle.
What is the statute of limitations on illegal interception of communications?
I don't know, 5 years. Steve Jabinski, who was supposed to be here, was the legal guy.
Let me ask you this, Keith, if you can. I want to try and describe for everybody here, when you talk about dark market, it's kind of this amorphous concept. I want you to, if you can, describe physically, you wake up in the morning, what it is that you're logging into, what the other people are seeing, and you talk about how they're sharing all of this data in this forum. Can you describe that in clearer terms so people can get a picture of what it actually looks like?
Sure. It's a website, and it's like a bulletin board form. So you may have gone on like photography or bike bulletin boards, except the difference on this is it's restricted. You can't get an account on it unless you know another member, and you have to be vouched in, usually by 1 or 2 members. So this prevents anybody from the street that just can just come in. So basically, you have to know 2 criminals or other undercover officers in order to get onto the site. So you go in there, and basically it's a forum, and there's different threads to talk about different things. So anything you want to know about credit cards and hacking, there's a thread there, and there are moderators. Anything about exploits and things, there's another. So there's these different threads, and then you have people that are selling the products. So you have vendors, and that's kind of what really drives the forum. So to be a vendor, you have to be reviewed by another respected member. So if I want to sell, let's just say, credit cards or an exploit, I have to provide a sample of like 100 cards to 2 reviewers. Then they would test them, and then they write a review, almost like eBay feedback, and say, hey, well, Master Splyntr has a good product, and I recommend them. So now that person could take out an ad, and then they can pay for advertising too. So they take out, if you have 15 people selling credit cards, why do you go over to one after another? Well, they have to advertise. So they'll advertise to get business. So people will then send each other communications, private messages there, and talk about different things. And those are some of the things that we would get during that. And one of the things that we would do is collect any of the compromised credentials that came through the sites and get them out to the banks to try to prevent economic loss. But you're on the site a long time because the bad guys, it's their job. They do it full time, and so you have to be there readily accessible just about all the time. And then one other thing that's there's kind of a hierarchy as well. In the Carter Planet, like Kevin had mentioned, they organized their hierarchy just like the Italian Mafia. You had a godfather, you had family members, and then below that you had capos and capo de capis. And then after 2005, when that went down, the bad guys kind of realized that if you're a capo or a godfather, that's kind of a bullseye for law enforcement. So they changed their names to like administrators and moderators, but you still have the hierarchy structure there.
Kevin, let me ask you from your perspective, looking at this from the outside and in your experience, the expertise that you've got in this area, talk about kind of this undercover capability that the Bureau put in place and other organizations have as well to infiltrate these groups. Knowing the people that you've been in contact with that have been in these groups before, how effective is it? And what's just kind of your perspective on that technique into infiltrating a wide-ranging organization?
it's stunningly effective. Even after it's been done, it seems to always work again. And even if you tell, not me personally, but even if a cyber criminal learns that, for example, Master Splyntr is an FBI agent, they're still inclined to dismiss it because it's something that they hear in passing, and that the evidence in front of their eyes that they see from the role that he's playing every day online just overwhelms that. Like it's like a thinking error, a blind spot that everybody seems to have, both with undercover agents and with informants. In Keith's case, at one point in the operation, DarkMarket was hacked by the hacker that was running a competing site called Carter's Market. This is the hacker Max Vision. It's the subject of my book, which is for sale up front. So Max Vision hacked DarkMarket, and he went through the logs, and he found through the logs that on a couple of occasions, Master Splyntr had logged in not from Poland, where he was supposed to be living, but from the National Cyber Forensics Training Alliance.
Close, but no. There was
another step.
There was many steps before the backstop fell.
There were a couple of other steps, a couple of other things that he had to run down.
Really?
Basically, the end of the line was he had pretty compelling evidence that Master Splyntr was an FBI agent.
Correct.
And he told everybody about this. He actually staged like a little mini trial online to present his evidence to other senior members of DarkMarket and other people in the community. Now, there were a couple of things. Keith had apparently gotten word from the Secret Service that this was going to happen because the Secret Service had already infiltrated Max's own hierarchy. Keith used that time to kind of cover up his tracks and eliminate some of the evidence that were in public records and the like. So that helped, but the overriding thing is that nobody ever wants to believe there's an FBI agent like in their midst or an informant in their midst. The psychology works in the favor of operations like this. So Max was basically Keith was acquitted. Max lost credibility in the community.
The Secret Service told me I should go into car sales afterwards.
A lot of cyber criminals believe that too. And a year later, Max was busted, and he was sent to Pittsburgh for prosecution. The very place where he had said to everybody, "Hey, this is where the FBI is running this operation out of." He was arrested in California, sent to Pittsburgh for prosecution, put in a Pittsburgh prison, and still nobody believed that he was right or that this had anything to do with Master Splyntr. And it was a full year later that the operation ran before Keith eventually pulled the trigger and took it down.
So I mean, obviously a very effective technique. Trying to in undercover operations generally, the key really is to understand the full scope of the organization. If you're to go out and arrest the person that's selling the illegal property, that's good. You got one person. You've got a huge organization that's behind that. That's why some of these cases take many years to really understand the full scope and the entirety of the operation, who's connected to whom, and to collect that type of evidence. Kevin's comments, I think, are really important in the credibility keys. And you talked a little bit about some of the things that you did to build your legend and your credibility. When you're doing that, developing this online undercover identity, how does it impact you from a personal perspective?
I think my wife was probably the biggest saint in the whole case, for sure, because you have to be available all the time. You can't, if the guy wants something, you can't say, hey, I can't do it right now. I have to take my son to gymnastics or something like that. There were many times where we were at the beach and my wife is saying, hey, let's go to the beach. And I'm like, no, we have to finish this thing on the server. So it was time consuming. Most of the guys were on at night, so I would have to be on at night and then come in to work and do the paperwork and all that. So but you kind of get used to it. It is a rush for sure, knowing that you're fooling people. There's no doubt about it, but it does take a lot of effort to really try to sell yourself that. But my wife is the biggest saint in the whole thing for sure. She was happy when I was done.
Good. Kevin, let me ask you, with your experience, people that you've interviewed through Wired, people that you've associated with, can you talk a little bit about kind of and I know this is a very generalization, but the type of characteristics some of these people have, what their personas are all about. Tell us a little bit about the people that are engaged in this type of activity, the criminals.
It's hard to find a generalization that really applies. It's completely globalized now. So you have bad actors in every country, and they tend to cluster in Eastern Europe, but they're everywhere. They tend to be I think they tend to be technically oriented and on the smart side, but not always. A lot of the hacking part actually takes a lot of skill and ingenuity, but beneath that, or fed by that, you have people in all sorts of different roles that don't necessarily require a lot of expertise. There are people that just use stolen credit cards to go out and buy things and sell them online, and they're run-of-the-mill scammers. They would exist in any place and time and be doing some variation on the same thing. I found that a lot of them, a lot of the hackers that are doing this, tend to view it as a victimless crime. They know that if they steal a credit card number from somebody and run up $10,000 in charges, that the consumer is not going to wind up, at least in the U.S., is not going to wind up holding the bag for them. It'll be passed on to the banks, in some cases the merchants. So they justify that way sometimes. They don't view themselves as bad guys. Sometimes they at least start off seeing themselves as Robin Hoods. That was the case with Max Vision. He started off as a good guy, a white hat hacker, who went bad and increasingly made these little justifications to drive himself more towards the criminal end.
Yeah, and I think just to add on that too, I think there's not many people that go into the cybercrime and say, "Hey, I want to be a cyber criminal." Like what Kevin was saying, they just start out really slow. And then slowly the line just gets blurred. Hey, I logged into this bank account and I didn't take anything, but I logged in. And then okay, well, let me try to do this thing, and they just kind of slowly escalate where they don't necessarily realize the extent of what they're doing because they haven't got caught. The first time you do it, you're worried about the police coming in and busting you. And then after you've done it dozens and hundreds of times and they're not there, then it's no big deal. And then you push the envelope a little bit more, I think. So that's kind of what I've been seeing.
So you use that then as a jump-off point. So you've identified that DarkMarket is clearly a criminal enterprise. You want to find a way to infiltrate it. You start to develop your legend. You get online. You start talking to people. Kind of walk us through the mechanics of the case. This was over a multi-year period. So kind of walk us through what that looks like and kind of the different stepping stones that you had until you really realized at some point we're gonna arrest a lot of people.
Right. So what we did was we kind of triaged and kind of looked at who we thought were the most egregious people on the forum, and naturally we started with the other administrators, so the other family members, so to speak. So from collecting the intelligence on the site, we were kind of able to identify the different locations where they lived worldwide. And then what we would do is go over and work with the law enforcement overseas. So, one of the other administrators, a guy used the nickname Matrix, he was in Germany. Jilcy was in the UK. And this other guy, Chow, was in Turkey. And then there were others along the way. So what we did was to try to look at the most egregious people and then start putting together intelligence packages on them, identify where they're at, and then engage the other law enforcement overseas. And we had a number of them come and work with us in Pittsburgh, where we could share intelligence real time. There were some unique challenges too. So in Germany, they don't have any data retention. So in order for them to get a subscriber information on an IP address, the person has to be online physically at that time. So and you have a 6-hour difference. So and then obviously German ISPs close at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So you get up early, you start engaging with the guy over there. You have them. So we have what we call a pen register on ICQ number. So ICQ is an instant messaging. So so a pen register is a court order that we have that we would send to AOL that makes ICQ. And what that would do is record in real time the IP address that logs in. Normally you get them at the end of the day, but we needed something in real time. So I come in, I start engaging with Matrix, I'm chatting online, I call AOL, they know we have the order, they give me the IP address, I call Germany, say he's online right now, here's his IP address, they reach out to the ISP in order for us to get an identity. Then for them to have a location to then start their investigation to see who was at that internet cafe and then go from there. So different kinds of challenges like that, but we get the evidence for whatever they need, and then we have to work with the prosecutors. So one of the things is each country has different speeds at which they do their judicial process. So we made a decision at the beginning, hey, when anybody was ready to bring somebody down, we would just slowly pick them off one by one. So we started with Germany, and then the UK, and then eventually Turkey and others along the line. But they would ask us for evidence, and then we would also have to send mutual legal assistance treaties, which are a long process that we go through the Department of Justice to be able to share between countries to get the evidence.
That attribution piece is really, really critical because what an IP address does is it tells you potentially a particular computer, but you actually have to find out who's behind the keyboard.
Correct.
Right? Particularly when you're talking about some of this happening from internet cafes, which is open to the general public, and it could be dozens or hundreds of people over the course of a day.
Right, and that's how the UK, with Gilsey, one of the other administrators, he was using an internet cafe exclusively, and they had to have surveillance there to see when he was online and cameras, and then follow the guy in order to get that true identity for sure.
So Kevin, let me ask you. This is a question. I'm going off my script here, but because you used to be a hacker, you better be able to answer this question. So I'm interested in the whole anonymity piece. From a law enforcement perspective, it's incredibly important to do attribution and identify who the bad guy is. In the physical world, we have video cameras, and we have witness identification, and we have financial records that can tie us back to the body. In the cyber environment, in the virtual world, it's really a bit of a challenge. Again, from a law enforcement perspective, I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about anonymity and kind of the hackers and how they hide themselves, hide behind that, some of the things that they do, and the steps that they take to maintain that anonymity.
So, as a general matter, I disagree about the scope of the anonymity problem. I think we are much less anonymous online generally than we are in real life, because everything leaves a trail and everything is logged everywhere. Criminals, though, I'll concede, have a much easier time being anonymous because there are no barriers to them doing things like hacking 5 computers in series and bouncing through all of them before going to their end destination. So they'll pull tricks like that, and that makes it very hard because if you want to trace them, you have to get the cooperation. If you're doing it like through multiple countries, you have to get the cooperation of all of these law enforcement agencies all the way back in order to trace them. There are anonymity tools that they're using more and more designed to protect human rights activists, but they can also be used by criminals. One is called Tor. It stands for the Onion Router. And it kind of does the same thing. It bounces your connections around, but it does it legally, and it does it with a level of cryptographic security where it's theoretically mathematically possible to track anybody back. It should be a complete obstacle to de-anonymizing somebody. The feds have recently made some breakthroughs against Tor by doing things like taking over a malicious website that they know that a criminal is going to visit and then using it to serve, to basically hack the target of the investigation through their web browser. So then it doesn't matter how many different hops they're going through to get to their destination. The browser gets hacked, and then their own computer just reports back to an FBI computer and says, "Here I am. Here's my name. Here's some stuff from my hard drive."
Using authorized judicial process. They didn't hack it.
Using
Thank you, Sean.
just carefully authorized judicial hacking. Yes. So yeah, there's a cat and mouse game going on. And I think that's kind of at the cutting edge. I think right now, that's where a lot of the battle is taking place between the criminals and the feds. And there's a lot. I think there's a lot going on there that we don't yet know about. I'm going to ask Keith about it after.
Keith, let me talk to you about. Oftentimes people think about computers and the whole technology piece, but I think Kevin just did a good job, and we've talked about the people behind this. There are human beings there. You're involved investigating the online forum, digitally, electronically, but there are people that are involved in actual criminal activity that are taking overt physical acts. How do you, in the course of the investigation, there has to be concern from a law enforcement perspective about what's happening outside of your scope of control, and how, from a law enforcement perspective, how do we, the FBI, protect against that and limit the damage from that? What are your thoughts about what's happening outside?
Yeah, I mean, well, we try to any accounts that we got that we would discover, we would try to get those out and get them shut down to try to prevent any loss on that. And actually, sometimes it worked for me because if somebody would give me credentials to test or to ingratiate themselves, and I would give them to the financial institution, and we would get it shut down. If the bad guy would check them, it actually helped my legend because they would think it was shut down for fraud, that I committed fraud on it, but really we saved it. But there's always things going on. So anytime we would get a heads up that something was going to happen, we would try to get that intelligence out to the law enforcement. Another thing that had happened, we actually had some violence with our Turkish administrator, who actually Kevin wrote about. I believe he had captured a guy, one of his rivals, and he had kidnapped him and beat him up, and then posted a warning message, basically saying, "Hey, my name is Kier, and basically I shouldn't be messing with this operation." So we knew about it ahead of time to get that over to the Turkish law enforcement to try to prevent anything further on that. But those are things that happen all the time that we have to.
Talking about credentials, usernames and passwords to different accounts.
Yeah.
So banking credentials, the username and passwords to people's commercial accounts or personal accounts.
Right, but in the case of Kier, it was actually physical violence that he kidnapped them. So we got that out. But we tried to limit any damage to any consumers for sure.
Kevin, there was actually a time, I think, when you believed that Master Splyntr was an FBI agent. Is that right? Just keep.
I'm pretty sure right now.
That's an endorsement. That book is true.
So I came to the story through two independent trails that wound up connecting. One of them was Max Vision, who I'd been following for years. He first got in trouble in 2004. Hacking Pentagon computers and closing their security holes for them. He was like a white hat, gray hat hacker at the time. He eventually went bad, and when I started reporting on his story, I found out that he had been telling people that DarkMarket was an undercover sting. At almost the exact same time that I learned this incident that Keith was just talking about, where Chow, the Turkish guy, kidnapped a suspected informant and posted his photo tied to a chair on DarkMarket. I learned of that through a carder who was on DarkMarket, and that got me really interested in what was going on there. So I'd heard that DarkMarket was a sting, but then I also see that there's a kidnapper on DarkMarket. So the two didn't really seem to mesh completely. So I eventually got I got somebody to I got an existing administrator, not Keith, but one of the actual criminals, to give me an account on DarkMarket myself, so I could go in and see what was going on and see what the carters were doing, what the environment was. And I saw Master Splyntr's posts, and they were extremely convincing. Like it was. He doesn't. Let's just say, as Master Splyntr, he does not write like an FBI agent.
Does he use bad words?
There were some bad words, but mostly like, a lot of, kind of sloppy writing, kind of, jargon and casual, a lot of arrogance. He did arrogance extremely well. Laughing at cops and calling everybody snitches. Like, if he didn't like somebody, he'd call him a snitch. So it was completely in keeping with what you would expect from somebody from an actual cybercrime spammer, kingpin people. So that didn't convince me that he wasn't a Fed, but it definitely made me stop and think, well, maybe Max was wrong about this one. I was suspicious enough still that while DarkMarket was still running, I arranged for a tour of the office where Keith worked at the National Cyber Forensics Training Alliance, because it was a privately run nonprofit group where some FBI agents, including Keith, happened to have office space and work with them. So by going to the privately run part, the guy that headed this nonprofit, I said, hey, I'm a reporter with Wired. I'd love to see your operation to do a story on. So he brought me in and he introduced me around and he showed me the office. And I'm looking around to see if there's a server anywhere. It said DarkMarket on it. Or Master Splyntr hat sitting on one of the FBI agents. And eventually, the guy that ran it, Ron Plesko, I think he was, he actually introduced me to Keith, and we chatted for a little bit. And I said, hey, so I heard DarkMarket's an FBI sting, and he just laughed at me. Yeah, that's ridiculous. So I came away kind of doubting that it was a sting, but I took a lot of good notes, and they let me take some pictures inside. And then very shortly, I think it was just a couple weeks after that visit, Master Splyntr shut down DarkMarket. And with this long, flowery manifesto saying, I'm not going to go down the way Max Vision went down, and these other carters before me. I'm going to get out ahead of the game. I'm retiring. DarkMarket is gone. And then I did a story on that, and then it was shortly after that the German public radio reporter got a hold of some court records in the first DarkMarket bust. It was it was Matrix, this young kid that was busted in Germany, that showed outright that DarkMarket had been a sting, and that Master Splyntr was J. Keith Mularski.
And then I could add a little bit on that before you can pick up. So what had happened at that time, so I was targeting Matrix, and
The German guy.
The German guy. And so this is in May of 2007. And so we're scheduled to bring him down in a couple weeks. And Matrix hits me on instant messaging, and he says, I got the strangest email today. And I said, oh, yeah, what? He says, you're a Fed, you're an FBI agent. I'm like, oh, yeah, show me it. And so he shows me it. And it says, DarkMarket is an FBI sting, Master Splyntr is an FBI agent, destroy your hard drives, warn the EEL and these other people that we had scheduled for arrest. So this was like on a Tuesday or Monday that Matrix gives this to me. And I could see the header, it was a Hushmail account. And I said, I come back and I said, we got a serious problem. And it was one thing with Max saying I was working at the NCFTA, but now this is very specific, and it knows the people we're supposed to take down in the next couple weeks. So I reach out to the Germans, the Secret Service, the Brits, and we say, hey, we have a leak. And I tell them this on Tuesday. On Wednesday, Matrix hits me up again and goes, I got another email, and he pastes it, and it says, you effed up, except they expletive, you effed up, I warned you, so, you know, go suffer your fate, so to speak. So we knew that something now, there was a leak because I had warned people that there was a leak. Now it came back to them. We knew we had a serious leak. So we traced the Hushmail accounts. We sent an MLAT to Canada. We were able to trace it back to a German IP address, back to which we believe was a German police officer. My best understanding is that he had a falling out with the person that was running the Matrix investigation, so when he went to court, he said that Keith Mularski was Master Splyntr. Now, because it's tied with Matrix's case, when Matrix got arrested, this would be potential, what we would call Brady material in the United States, but stuff that would be discoverable to the defense. So that information got discovered and got put into the court documents, which then was found by the German reporter. So a week before I was supposed to bring it down, he calls me. His name was Kai, I think. Was it correct? He calls me and says, "Hey Keith, I know you're Master Splyntr, and I don't want to cause you any harm, but I have a really good case here, and you know you're in German court documents and all of that." And I was like, "Well, I can't do anything to help you, and you have to do what you have to do." So he then ran the story, which then picked up how you came.
Right. Yeah. The German reporter had seen my reporting on DarkMarket. I reported on his closure and the kidnapping and all that other stuff. So he talked to me about this, and he told me that Keith was identified as Master Splyntr. He wound up running his story, but he left Keith's name out of it. So I had Keith's cell phone number from my earlier visit to NCOTA. So I called him up. I called him up as soon as I got off the phone with the German reporter, and I said, "Holy shit, Keith, you're Master Splyntr." And I laughed. He laughed. He referred me to the press office.
So the funny thing was the timing of it all too, because we were scheduled to do so the site went down I think on like Saturday. I think your story came on Monday, I think it was, and we had all of the rest of our arrests in the UK planned for that Tuesday. We were really worried that this was going to impact that, but luckily for us it did. And like Kevin had said, that the bad guy still believed that I wasn't an FBI agent. You probably still don't. So, and you know, and they actually, you know, my authority went down to be undercover, and they messaged me, and I came just straight out and said it's true, and you know, you're talking to an FBI agent. And another one of the guys that wasn't home during the UK arrest, used the nickname The Unknown. He sent a message to me and just said, "You rat pig, you're never going to catch me." And I said, "Well, you know, we know you are, and we're going to get you. So you can either turn yourself in, or you know, spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder." And he did something. And actually, he was the last guy that just got sentenced for that last year. So that's all. So that's all.
Let me ask some questions here, because you've raised a bunch of issues. I mean, this is kind of talking about the conclusion here, and the arrest piece. This is after a couple of years of the covert in collecting all of this evidence. I think it's important to kind of paint the picture for everybody, the complexity and we started to talk about it here, of coordinating across so many different nations with different law enforcement agencies at different time zones. Incredibly complex. You've got to prioritize. There's 2,500 people that are in DarkMarket, on DarkMarket. You've got to prioritize who you're actually going to collect evidence and go after, because you can't go after 2,500. Right. So let's talk about this piece, the kind of mechanics that go into putting together this arrest plan and then actually executing it in a coordinated way with so many different organizations.
Yeah, so we had to focus again on the most egregious people that we thought would make the most impact. We were constantly on the phone with the prosecutors. What do you need? Is the timing all right? And conference calls daily saying,
hey, we can't go this day, but they can go this day, and can we, move things around, to do it, and then, the rest of sometimes in these countries are the easiest things. For us, we really, we have to have a complaint and all that. And in some of the other countries, they can go out and arrest, and then, the people are freed right away, and then they make their case over the course of the next year. So just the timing of it, and just working with everybody was really amazing. How we could coordinate that through all the many different countries, and there was a lot of people involved. Naturally, that wasn't just me on a call. That was a total team effort, with all the different countries. The other great thing too that I want to kind of give recognition to is the other countries that let us house our server there. Because naturally we didn't want to have DarkMarket in the United States, which makes it look like a Fed site. So we had to get permission to actually run an undercover operation and have infrastructure paid with undercover in places like Brazil and the Ukraine. And that takes drafting letters and getting approvals from the prosecutors to make sure that we're not running in foul of their laws over there. So there was a lot of things that we had to do, and then how do we take the evidence that we collected from there in Brazil and be able to use it in England, or be able to use it in Germany or in France? So there was a lot of different steps that we had to go through and coordinate.
You might want to comment on the tremendous support we had from FBI headquarters.
Well, in case you don't know, SHAWN was the but seriously, SHAWN was the deputy assistant director, and ultimately, when we came to him with the proposal, the unique thing about this operation too was a headquarters undercover operation. So it wasn't usually most undercover operations are done in the field offices, but this was a headquarters undercover. So actually, I think you were like the SAC of the operation in our approval process.
Kevin, let me ask you, kind of fast forward after this now, today. DarkMarket was arguably one of the most successful undercover operations in this space. There was an impact. Oftentimes in any type of criminal investigation, the adversaries are constantly changing their tactics and their capabilities are increasing. What type of changes do you think have occurred in the underground based on this particular investigation? What types of things have you seen where there have been big changes to their processes?
So I personally haven't seen a lot of change. For a while, there was a lot, after DarkMarket, there was a lot of paranoia, and nobody really. It was a while before there were other large Carter forums that took the place of DarkMarket and Carter's firm. But that eventually the paranoia subsided, new people entered the scene, memories were short, this kind of thing. So it's kind of exactly like it was now. Larger, there are more individual vendor sites, so people who sell stolen credit card numbers in bulk, some of the big ones are more prone to set up their own kind of retail outlet for it online instead of looking through the forums. But aside from that, it's all kind of the same. It's just bigger. And that DarkMarket formula, the FBI successfully competed again in another undercover sting site for 2 years. There was just recently a case in Las Vegas where a Secret Service agent assumed the identity of a member of the Carter forums and started using it to sell fake IDs in the underground. Developed his own persona, Master Splyntr style, less flamboyant. more reserved, didn't put as much effort into it. But so he developed his own legend, and he was selling fake IDs to criminals around the world through the forums and through the mail. And so this was a sting where he actually gets the mugshots of the suspect as the very first statement. They send pictures between people. So they made a lot of stuff for that.
So how does law enforcement stay ahead of this? Do this?
It seems to me that it's always going to be a numbers game, and the vast majority of the people in this underground community are probably going to get away with it, just because there's too many of them to bust them all, especially the low-level ones that are not worth the effort financially. It does seem like the feds are having a lot of success with the key tenants, at least in certain countries. Other places, Russia, the criminals still basically have more or less out.
I'm going to get two more questions here, and then we're going to turn to the audience and get the audience's questions. Keith, from your perspective, you arrested 60 people, but you've dealt with some of these people oftentimes, many times a week, multiple times per day. I know in the physical world, one of the things that we were always concerned about from the FBI perspective when there was an agent that was deep undercover was the relationships that they're developing, and do they still have contact kind of with the law enforcement community? They're not so enmeshed in the society that they lose contact. This was a little different because you were online and you were still with your family and you were with the squad. But tell us about the relationships you developed, some of these personal relationships with some of these people, what that's about, and then when it's time for these guys to go to prison, how that transpires.
It was fun chatting with these guys. They're interesting characters. We chatted a lot about traveling the world and making money and drinking and girls, like a lot of guys do. They were fun, interesting stories. But at the end of the day, you never lose track of what your ultimate goal is. Your ultimate goal is to get this guy to give you information so you could identify him and put him in jail. But it was fun chatting. I could honestly say for a couple months afterwards, to kind of decompress took a little bit of time because you're so used to just going and you get into that routine pattern where you get in and you want to see what's going on. It's like a soap opera. And very much so, as Kevin, I'm sure, can tell you, it is a soap opera out there. But they were interesting guys. But at the end of the day, you got to remember what your ultimate goal is. And so, I never had a physical contact. But you get to know the people pretty well, online for sure.
The last question I've got, I'll ask Keith first, and then Kevin maybe comment on it. You mentioned a number of times, we talked about the Turkish authorities, Ukrainian authorities, and the Brits, etc. This criminal activity, more so than any type of crime we've ever had in the law enforcement element, has that international nexus. I mean, everything either starts or ends somewhere. It's got some international connection one way or the other. And you can only be successful in this space with the cooperation of law enforcement. So Russia, not so much, but some of these other agencies. Can you talk about the relationship you've developed generally and then specifically as it relates to this?
Sure. I had my unit chief always had a slogan: "Make it personal." And because, as we know, they're busy with their things that they have to do, and now how do we get that to the next, for them to address it? So we spent a lot of time developing relationships, and I could say that, I think I can go through Europe right now for a month and never have to pay for a hotel room, based off all the friends. Working very closely, all the guys over there, they love working with the FBI. They love working things that make an impact. And we bring them in. They come in and work with us, like at the NCFTA, where we bring the international partners in. But just that's paramount, so to develop those personal relationships, because that's how anything gets done. And you move that. And I think that the FBI really in these last 7 years have really done such a great job at developing those. I know we have cyber, where we have legal attachés all around the world, and now we have these special cyber ones that we're putting in a lot of spots. So, to develop those relationships and move these cases forward, I think we're making a lot of great progress.
Not much more to add. There are definitely certain countries where it's safe to be a cyber criminal if you're not hacking within that country. And we've even seen cases where hackers will write malicious software that checks things like the keyboard that's being used on computers that it's infecting to make sure it's not like a Ukrainian keyboard. And it detects the Ukrainian keyboard, it stops what it's doing. So that nobody in Ukraine will be impacted and they won't be the local victims, which makes it a little bit harder for the local police to get treated.
All right, let's take some questions from the audience. I imagine there are some good questions here. We've got some microphones. We have our folks that can bring the microphones up. Got it. Okay.
I'm here, ready to go. So
Perfect. There you go, right here.
All right.
Good afternoon. You touched on a little bit about your personality that you developed online. Of this investigation, you got to learn about these people, and you saw their online profiles, and you got to imagine what they were based on their online profile. What was the most drastic difference you saw in real life in comparison to what they were online? Anything surprising?
I'll use Max Butler or Max Vision. I never thought that he would be exactly like he was. He was the most arrogant, pompous person ever online. In actuality, he's a very soft-spoken person. At least when I spoke with him, more timid and all that. So a lot of people's personality online is totally different. You have a lot more bravado online than you do in real life. To go rob a bank takes a lot of bravado, but to do it online, you can be anything you want. There was always a big contrast of what they appeared online to what they really were in real life, for sure.
I'm in charge of the security awareness training for my agency. What are some of the most important things that my users should know to keep bad things from happening to them?
Stay off the internet.
Yeah, well, that's a good one. There,
Probably another symposium.
yeah, there's so many threats. If the agency is a target, then the least that you can do is to make sure that people are aware enough that they don't click links that they get in email. But we've seen attacks that are so sophisticated that if you just visit the wrong website, your computer's infected and the whole network goes down. So making sure that everybody's machines are up to date and have the very latest patches, so that at least you're not running security holes that have been known about for years. Measures like that can make a difference. But for the end user, in the end, there's just not that much that they can do. They're not the ones that are equipped to protect themselves. It has to be the IT experts. It has to be the computer security people.
The bottom line, too, and I'm sure Sean could even chime in, too, is that if somebody really wants to throw a targeted attack at your company, there's not going to be much that you're going to be able to do. There's little repercussions. When you try to reach a company, like physically and go in, there's repercussions. But to send an email and say somebody doesn't open that, so tomorrow I send 10 emails and I send it to different people. You just need somebody to open up an attachment. How easy is that? You have a company, I send a resume to HR that has a booby-trapped resume. What are the chances that they're going to open that? Probably 100%. There's really no safe computer. There you can only minimize your exposure, in my opinion, for sure.
Yeah, from a security perspective, IT sector perspective, really, the most sophisticated adversaries are going to get on a network. They're too vast, they're too broad, there's just too many ways in. We're talking about some organizations that have 50,000 endpoints, 100,000 endpoints, mobile devices, laptops. What organizations need to do is use intelligence to actually understand and look for anomalies on the network. They have to look for tactics that the adversaries are using. They have to look for code that the adversaries are using so that they can detect an attack and then mitigate the consequences. In the FBI, our agents went out dozens of times a week and knocked on the doors of major companies around this country and told them that they'd been breached. And in many of the cases, most of the cases, the company had no idea they'd been breached. And after they first denied it, it didn't happen, couldn't happen. We said, was this all your stuff? You put the background on the breached. They go back and they do some remediation and they determine that in fact, yes, they've been breached 4 months ago, or 8 months ago, or 2 years ago, which means that the adversary had unfettered access to that network for 4 months or 8 months or 2 years. And if you give somebody 4 months or 8 months or 2 years unfettered within your environment, bad things are going to happen. If you can detect the adversary breaching that network within minutes or hours, if you can detect them quickly, you can mitigate the consequences. Because unlike the movies, when they make access to the network, particularly a large organization network, it'll take them weeks or months to actually get to the point where they can do significant damage to the organization. So if you can detect them early. So the awareness is critical. You absolutely have to do that. But beyond that, the IT people need to be alert. They have to be collecting intelligence about who the adversaries are, what are they after, what are the tactics that they're using, and how do you then hunt on the network for those adversaries. Question in the back first, and then we'll come over here.
Thank you. Well, thanks.
Sir, we'll bring you a mic.
No, I don't think you
It helps everyone here.
Okay, thanks. With banks in America, I know that there are no smart cards like in Europe. I know they have like an RFID chip or there's some kind of chip in the card that makes it really hard to hack. Why does American banks, why won't they do that? I mean, wouldn't it be their advantage? They're paying out those millions of dollars in charges. Why don't they do something about that? I don't get that.
So the technology you're talking about, it's called EMV. In Europe, it's called chip and pin, and it completely thwarts the type of large-scale credit card thefts that we're talking about, because there's a computer in every card and it authenticates the transaction in real time over a network. So there's basically nothing for a hacker to steal. It's been slow coming here because no matter how much banks have been losing and retailers have been losing, consumers have been paying increased interest rates, it's incredibly expensive to switch out the entire point of sale infrastructure. You have to every terminal from the cash registers at major retailers to the little 15-year-old terminal sitting on the counter in a local liquor store. All of that has to be upgraded, and then the back-end infrastructure has to be completely redone. So it's very expensive, and that's why it hasn't happened in the U.S. It's happened everywhere else except the U.S. That's starting to change now, and deadlines have been set to move towards EMV in the U.S. I think things are accelerating because of a recent, publicized breach of this program.
Sponsor me, right?
Pick on them as much as possible. And so it's headed here, but it's still going to be a matter of years. And we won't be free and clear until the magnetic stripe on the back of the car is completely eliminated. For that to happen, everybody has to be adopted.
Here.
So you've spoken about the electronic market for the fruits of the crime. Is there sort of a comparable market or forums for the programs that actually allow for the hacking to occur? And is that another way that can be infiltrated and sort of stop it before the crimes actually occur?
Yes, sure.
Exploits.
We already discussed that.
Yeah, the exploits, it's all sold on the forum. So, I mean, anything you need is out there from the data to how to get in, to, the different exploits of different malware. It's all marketed. They're made to, it can either be under the same banner or there'd be another forum that has that specific stuff there for sure. Everything's automated now too, so in the old days you had to be very technical, but now you can just go and buy an exploit and launch it. It's very, very simple to do.
The one exception is the type of exploit that we call a zero-day exploit, which is an exploit against a vulnerability that nobody knows about except the person who discovered it. So there's no way to patch it or fix it. And those are so valuable that they're priced out of the cybercrime marketplaces because government agencies buy them for upwards of $100,000. So it's generally only when, for the most part, it's only when an exploit is discovered in the wild that it starts being to go and made easy to use and offered for sale.
Hi, sorry, two quick questions. First, out of curiosity, have you come across any female hackers? And
Would you like to become a female hacker?
stories about that would be interesting. But second one, we know that China's having police online, and it also has one of the bigger growing populations online. Have you seen any sophisticated hacking out of China, and has there been any dialogue, successful dialogue with the Chinese authorities when it comes to trying to start to get into that situation?
I'll take the female hacker. There are female hackers out there, and there's been a couple prominent ones, that have been arrested. Overseas, I know of a couple of Ukrainians, a Russian one as well, that's been out there. And I think that we also, in Atlanta a few years ago, we arrested a female hacker as well. So they are out there. They're not, all hackers aren't guys.
Say something about China. So you may have heard that the Chinese government is sponsoring a lot of attacks on not only the U.S. infrastructure, but also Western society worldwide, targeting corporations for intellectual property, research and development, corporate strategies, etc., not just personally identifiable information. Because quite often the government is interested in how to make their companies much more competitive in the U.S. market. So we've seen companies that have lost billions of dollars of intellectual property that have gone to nations, states, specifically to empower those organizations. So not traditionally personally identifiable information, which is oftentimes limited to the former Soviet organized crime groups, but the nation states that are stealing information. In my opinion, one of the most effective ways to deter those types of attacks is for there to be some government-to-government discussion. And I believe that we need to define for these foreign governments what the red line is for accessing U.S. companies. And if you cross this line, this is what the repercussions are. That's not happening, certainly not in a large-scale forum or a public forum. My information is it's happening very, very limited. It certainly hasn't gotten to the point where there's actually hard-scale lines that have been prescribed. But we've got to make it more difficult and make it costly for these countries. Right now, the value is in billions of dollars, and the cost is about that, because there's no deterrence. And we can deter them with economic sanctions, with civil suits, with potential criminal actions against company executives that are the beneficiaries of all the stolen money. So there's a whole bunch of things that can be done, I think, in this space. They've not been done for a variety of reasons, but I think that we've got to start changing that paradigm. We've got to make a shift in that area and make this much more costly. Otherwise, this is a simple math equation. The value is here, the cost is here, it goes on forever. And unless we invert that math equation, we're going to be talking about this 30 years from now. I have a woman in the back there.
I believe you said there were 60 convictions as a result of this operation. Can you tell us a little bit about what they were for and what dollar value you place on them?
We actually, it was over 60, and it was all classified depending on what the country's laws were. So, for example, in Turkey, they really don't have an intrusion law of hacking. They have wire fraud. And they have organized crime laws. So what we tried to do was, when we were making the cases, well, how do we categorize the cybercrime into what their laws that they have over there? So we didn't care whether they charged wire fraud or computer intrusion, as long as they charged something, pursuant to their judicial laws. So, so we had to work very closely with our foreign partners. So the majority of the charges were 10 1030, which is our computer intrusion, unauthorized access, identity theft, access device fraud, wire fraud, bank fraud, having counterfeit documents. I can't remember exactly which one. I think that would be access device. But that's what the majority of our charges were. Economic loss prevented. We would throw that in as well. Yeah, $70 million.
The woman right here.
Just because in the last decade or so alone, there's been more prevalent cases of mass storage in different companies, cell phone companies, Google. Have you seen, is there like an uptick in the range that these attacks are getting? Like, there's small time stuff, but because of all the mass storage problems now, that there could be less instances of hacking, but because there's so much storage in a single place, the damages are like heightened.
So the prior to the Target hack, the biggest hack was TJ Maxx, and that was a good 10 years ago, and it was about the same size. So I think we haven't seen enough large-scale attacks to see a trend of them growing in an exponential way. We still see billions and zillions, to use a scientific word, small attacks against individual retailers and restaurants in particular. That's something that's still going on, and that adds up to a lot of credit card numbers going out as well. So in that respect, the big data movement hasn't changed anything. So we're seeing hackers being able to turn a lot of little data points into big data just by operating on a massive scale.
One of the things too is, you may have a fairly secure system, but you have many different third-party vendors that are out there as well that are vulnerable, and so the bad guys know, well, I could hack. There's an exploit against this piece of software, and I know that this company provides software for all these other different companies now, which makes all these other different companies vulnerable. So we see that where they get maybe a point-of-sale terminal that's vulnerable, or when they're all deployed, they use the same password. So now the bad guys start scanning to see, okay, well, who runs that point-of-sale terminal? Let me try these default passwords to get in. So that's another angle that they try to get in that could make the hack bigger.
Let me say one quick point, because we've talked about a particular company and that they've been breached and we've got a lot of notoriety. I think it's really important for us to look more broadly at this issue. And I've seen a lot of congressional representatives, and I've seen people in the media who, because this happened at a certain period of time during Christmas, it's gotten a lot of notoriety. This is happening every single day to many organizations around this country that we don't hear about, and it's happening every day. And we need to focus less on the victims. We need to focus more on actually who's doing this, which is what Keith did with his undercover operation, and what the FBI and the Secret Service and law enforcement agencies, intelligence agencies around the world are doing every single day. How about we find the people that are actually doing it? How about we step up and stop them, and pull them off, and stop pointing fingers at the victims? I get a little incensed when I hear representatives 5 blocks away who were talking for the last 10 years about legislation that needs to be implemented, yet none of it has been implemented for 10 years. I think it's really important for us to focus our efforts on who the adversaries are and the people that are really taking bad acts and are harming every one of us. When somebody says, Kevin, rightfully so, they think it's a victimless crime, well, those costs are getting passed on to all of us in a variety of different ways. It's really important for us to focus our efforts on who the adversaries are so that we can stop them, like Keith did and the other agents that were involved in this really successful case. Let me do, I think we've got time for probably one more question. So you had yours.
I'm really not sure which of you this is a question for, but you mentioned back in the late 1990s, there was the aha moment that information could be monetized because you get credit cards, you could make money off of that. And then there was personally identifiable information, and
that's been the status quo for 15 years. Do you see anything new coming on? There's been some talk of encryption programs that lock up your drive and essentially ransomware. Are we looking at person identifiable information and stealing account information for the foreseeable future? Or is there something new on the horizon that we should be looking at, thinking how to defeat, stay ahead of?
I mean, the schemes change regularly. You know, the schemes that were prevalent a couple years ago aren't necessarily the ones that are prevalent now. You mentioned the ransomware and the CryptoLocker that's out there. That's a big scheme. You know, that we've put out public service advisories, you know, about that. One of the other things that you've been seeing a lot in the news is the compromise of individuals that are working for health organizations that are doing tax fraud. You know, that's a big thing that's exploding right now in the news. You know, lately. So the bad guys look at different ways how to monetize you know, our lives that are all online now. And you know, as soon as we close one loophole to you know, make it harder for them, they find another one somewhere. You know, this is organized crime we're up against. These guys, this is their day job, and these guys can be very smart running a corporation and all that, but they choose to focus their attention, you know, this other way. So, you know, as much as we'll close a hole, the bad guys are going to always find another scheme. Just like in real life, there's all these different types of frauds or all these different types of things that are out there. And that's only going to get more prevalent as more and more of our lives are online, and the younger people grow up with an internet their whole lives. You know, it's going to be natural for them to commit these type of crimes.
I think we're getting ready to wrap up here. So I appreciate everybody's questions. Great interaction from the audience. I think that this is really an area that everybody recognizes as a growing area, an area that from a law enforcement perspective has tremendous challenges, has wide-ranging implications to everybody here in this room for a variety of reasons, and it's something that we're going to see for a long time. Let's first have a hand for our two panelists. I want to thank Target for their sponsorship and the Spy Museum, Peter, for what you did hosting us here, and certainly Craig and your team have done a phenomenal job. I want to thank all of you for taking your time out to come here today and for the very thought-provoking questions. And just really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I know Kevin is going to be signing books in the back. If you want to sign them, get them signed. He'll be there. Yes. Thank you all for being here.